Let me call the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands to order. Oversight hearing today on the fiscal year 2008 budget request for National Park Service. Good morning, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's Oversight hearing on the National Park Service's fiscal year 2008 budget request. The 390 units of the National Park Service represent a rich and varied tapestry of America. Writer and environmentalist Wallace Stenger said, "National parks are the best idea we ever had. Absolutely American, absolutely democratic. They reflect us at our best rather than our worst." But in recent years, National Park Service has suffered from budget neglect. Funding has not even kept pace with the increases in fixed costs such as heating bills and cost of living adjustments. Reports from the Government Accountability Office have shown that the much-discussed maintenance backlog is not diminishing. In fact, this year's budget request is for less money than was requested for the National Park Service 5 years ago. This level of investment is hardly the way to ensure that on its 100th birthday in 2016, our National Park Service system will reflect us at our best rather than our worst. After several years of plainly inadequate budget requests, the administration now proposes to prepare for the centennial with a new centennial initiative. As part of this initiative, there will be a lot of talk about this year's budget request providing the largest increase ever for park operations. While any increase is a positive step, it must be noted that much of this increase appears to come at the expense of other important park programs. We look forward to the Director's thoughts on these trade-offs. In addition, the administration's plan to ready the parks for the centennial relies on a large part on asking for donations from the American people. The plan would require the agency to solicit $100 million in private funds as a prerequisite to Congress to match that amount. With what such a proposal might mean on the ground must be explored. For example, the Park Service will need to raise nearly $60 million and bank on a mandatory match from Congress just to restore park construction to last year's level. This new reliance on fundraising is troubling to some extent. I believe that agencies and employees of the federal government should provide services to the American public and not be required to hit them up for donations to fund our park facilities. Let me be clear, I support more funds for the National Park Service, for them to carry out its responsibilities as steward of our national heritage. We all welcome increases for park operations, but these increases should not come at the expense of other park programs or rely on budget gimmicks. I look forward to hearing from Director Bomar regarding this budget request and how it addresses our national responsibility to be good stewards of our national treasures. With that, I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Bishop, for his opening comments. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Today we're pleased to be joined by the Director of the National Parks System, Mary Bomar. It is her first appearance before the subcommittee. We welcome you, Director, and especially in a sharp uniform there. The President recently unveiled his plan to prepare the National Park Service for its centennial celebration. As part of this, the Park Service proposed operating budget will receive an increase of $258 million over the fiscal year, 2006 fiscal year. This is an enormous commitment, especially in light of the significant decreases to other areas, specifically the Forest Service and BLM, which are also under this committee's jurisdiction. I am encouraged, though, by the direction that this budget is taking, the correct direction, I may say, this budget is taking, in choosing to focus on park operations and not on acquisition of additional land or construction of new burdens in the 390-unit system. Our constituents expect to find quality facilities, knowledgeable rangers when they visit our parks. I hope that these additional funds, the focus will remain on enhancing that to which we already have been entrusted, and that the proposed addition of 3,000 seasonal rangers will go far in achieving the educational mission of the Park Service. I hope that Director Bomar will further detail how this budget moves in this direction of efficiently managing the maintenance backlog. As the service moves towards its centennial, it would be unfortunate to miss this opportunity to assess the conditions of the park assets and adequately address the backlog needed. At Dinosaur National Monument in Utah, for example, the structure protecting the prehistoric fossils has been condemned. It's no longer safe for visitors or for staff and our students in Utah and Colorado and surrounding states. from all over the world, in fact, would not see the main attraction at this park if they were to visit it today. This is another opportunity that's lost, and I hope this budget does some way address that problem and similar embarrassments around the country. Attendance at our national parks continues to decline despite the growth of our population. So I hope that this is a trend that Director Bomar intends on reversing, and that visitors will feel welcome in the parks, not as if they're a detriment or an impairment to the park resources. I hope, how does this budget reflect the desire of the Park Service to welcome back a broad cross-section of past visitors that seem to have forgotten these are their parks is a significant question. The new director has a tremendous task. I look forward to working closely with you and with the chairman on these important goals, and will just remind you that the Golden Spike Historic Center is the only one you really care about. Okay.
I've got it, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. I would like to welcome also today's witness, National Park Service Director Mary Bomar. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting her, Director Bomar brings to this post nearly 2 decades of experience with the National Park Service, including her most recent position as Regional Director at the Northeast Region. Welcome, Director Bomar, and congratulations on your new position, and it's my pleasure to recognize you for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you. Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, it is my pleasure to have the opportunity to appear before you today on the National Park Service's FY 2008 budget proposal. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit my entire statement for the record and summarize my remarks. Mr. Chairman, I feel quite fortunate in my first appearance before this subcommittee as director to be able to present such good news for our national parks. We are very pleased that the Bush administration has proposed such a large operating increase for our parks, $258 million more than in FY 2006, with the prospect for continued substantial increases during the years ahead. As this committee is well aware, over the last decade, there has been a gradual erosion in our ability to fund basic operational needs, with a detrimental effect on the protection of park resources and the quality of the visitor experience. The President and Secretary Kempthorne heard this message loud and clear and decided to tie the compelling need for an infusion of funding to the upcoming 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, which will be celebrated in 2016. The FY 2008 budget represents the start of the President's Centennial Initiative for the National Park Service. The initiative proposes investing up to $3 billion in new funds for the National Park System over the next 10 years. $1 billion would be $100 million annually through appropriations for operations above and beyond the regular increases, and $1 billion in philanthropic donations that would be matched by up to $1 billion in 10 years in federal funds. We will be seeking the committee's assistance in enacting legislation to establish the Centennial Challenge Fund, the fund which would make available matching funds from philanthropic donations. If authorized, the funds leveraged through this public-private partnership will be used to accomplish signature projects and protect park assets, preserve the heritage of America, maintain park facilities, and improve the services to visitors. Soon, Secretary Kempthorne and I will embark on a series of listening sessions at sites throughout the country. Drawing from the ideas generated during these sessions, Secretary Kempthorne will present a list of signature projects and programs as part of the Centennial Report due to the President in May of 2007. As for the appropriations we are seeking for the FY 2008, there is a great deal of specific information prepared in my statement. I would like to simply touch on a few of the highlights. The focus of this request, as I suggested, is the largest increase in park operations in the history of the National Park Service. Operations funding would be $258 million higher than in FY 2006, which is an increase well above the $57.5 million needed just to pay for increases and fixed costs. pay increases, rent, utilities, and such. The portion of the operations increase designated as the $100 million centennial funding increase would be used to hire 3,000 more seasonal park rangers, guides, and maintenance workers, conduct preventive maintenance programs to extend the life of the facilities, enhance the Volunteers in Park program, enroll more children in the Junior Web Ranger programs, and target specific natural and cultural resource improvements. Much of this funding would be used to serve as a catalyst for one of our chief goals, connecting people to parks, to re-engage the American public. The budget request continues with strong support for asset management with an emphasis on preventive maintenance to safeguard the substantial investment we have made in addressing the facility maintenance backlog. Total funding for maintenance, including the funding for park roads from the Highway Trust Fund and use of fee revenue, would be substantially increased. Although the request is strongly focused on taking care of our core responsibility for park operations, the budget does sustain our stewardship responsibilities that reach beyond the national park system by continuing to fund programs such as Rivers and Trails and Conservation Assistance, Heritage Partnerships, Preserve America, Historic Preservation, and the American Battlefield Protection Program. Mr. Chairman, in closing, may I again say how critical the Centennial Challenge Fund will be in our efforts to make our national parks our national treasures, vibrant for the generations to come. We believe the prospect of matching funds will inspire our nation's businesses, associations, and individuals to join the effort to make our parks the very best that they can be. There are special places in America that unite us all as Americans, and national parks are those special places. Your help with the legislation is guaranteed to bring a magnificent results for our national parks. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have, sir.
Thank you very much. Before I start the questioning, Director Bomar, if there is staff with you or
yes,
that would like to join you at the table.
Chairman, yes, thank you for asking. I would like to ask my two colleagues to join me. On my right is Bruce Schaefer, the Comptroller of the National Park Service, and on my left is Dan Wink, who is the new Deputy Director and is in my office now, and I'm very pleased to have him aboard. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, and your full statement is incorporated into the record or any other material that you might want to be part of the record. Let me, if I may, begin with just some. I think one of the focal points of the increase from 2006, $258 million, to the National Park Service. Let me just try to break down what that number means. How much of this increase, the $250 million, comes from cuts in other programs within the National Park Service? And what programs are they in which those cuts are occurring? First of all, the amount, and second of all, some example of some of those programs.
And so actually there were no cuts from the programs. When we put the budget together, Mr. Chairman, what we focused on, we listened to our superintendents. You know, sir, I come from the field, almost 16 years experience, and we felt the most important need in the national parks today was for the operations of the National Park Service. To increase our staffing, this budget brings along 3,000 seasonal employees. So the total budget, in fact, there were no cuts. It was a decision that was made to make sure that we, again, focused on the operations of the National Park Service, the superintendents, employees in the field. We've had a strong emphasis on increasing our park operations for daily visitor services, sir.
And so the reduction, let's say, in historical preservation, the $114 million in construction, how do we interpret that? As reprioritization, but not cuts? I don't, just for a definition.
Yes, we will still continue in our repair, rehab. You talked a little bit about backlog maintenance. You know, we salute Congress and the President for the backlog maintenance being on the screen. Most of us in the park have used and made significant strides in backlog maintenance using a three-prong approach of repair, rehab funding, construction funding. We've certainly made great strides in the maintenance backlog. And for historic preservation, there is actually $300,000 in vanishing treasures, which has been a great program, again, with the National Park Service. And maybe, Bruce, if you'd like to add to that.
Mr. Chairman, the way we formulate a budget, it's not unlike what goes on over here from allocations. We were developing this budget off of the 07 President's request, which was at the time the only active benchmark we had. The construction allowance, for example, while we're down, as you mentioned, I believe the number you mentioned was probably down from the 06
Exactly.
Number. We weren't actually, that was an appropriated number. We were actually working off a number that was in the President's request for 07. It was much lower than that, and it was actually consistent with the House and Senate marks. So the fact was there were no specific trade-offs within in the course of our discussions with OMB and the Department of Interior. The Interior Department's budget is up 4% for the first time in many years. Our budget is up in most categories. The historic preservation is slightly down because Congress had been appropriating more, for example, in the
Let me
heritage
interrupt
programs.
if I may, because I've got one other question. But how much of the increase is going toward fixed cost?
About $50 million.
Yes, $54 million, sir.
I want to get to the other point, and that's the seasonal workers. And how does that complement the program, the Rangers Career Program that the Park Service has been promoting in terms of enhancing career opportunities and a path for future rangers, future employees of the Park Service?
Thank you for asking that question. The 3,000 seasonals that will be coming in, sir, will be 1,000 in maintenance, 1,000 in interpretation, and 1,000 in law enforcement. Many teachers, seasonal started many years ago in the national parks where teachers would come in during the summer to work, and they were every summer they would come back and work in the national parks. And also, it gives our students an opportunity now to come into the national parks, work in seasonal positions, and again, they will be, hopefully, the next generation coming into the National Park Service as new employees. Many prefer to stay in the seasonal role, but
different status in the sense that the seasonal doesn't qualify for the programmatic benefits that other Park Service employees would have, right?
Yes, sir. When seasonals come in, yes, it is for a specific time, and it's usually during the heavy period. Due to the erosion over the years of our fixed costs, seasonals now can come in during the summer. It was the seasonals that we actually lost due to not having the fixed costs. So that program did suffer. Many people, as I said, were teachers, prefer to have a seasonal position and come in during the high visitor peak periods. So we're glad to have our seasonals coming back in when they're needed the most during the heavy visited period of time, which most parks is during the summer.
Thank you. I have another question. We get another turn on the dedicated funding stream and that legislative proposal and how that's going to work. But at this point, at the request of the ranking member Bishop, I'm going to turn for questioning to Mr. Pierce.
Yes, sir, if I may, seasonals do get benefits when they work with us. They get the full benefits as any other employee. For some of them, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you adjusting the order. I've got a markup. Ms. Bomar, thanks for your service and your willingness to take the job. It's not always a job that's thanked enough. As I take a look, what is your estimates of the maintenance backlog? Just roughly, I hear different numbers.
The maintenance backlog, as you know, sir, is a continuing movement.
What's the number?
Exactly. I think the number with this budget would be about $6.5 million. To date, we have
not addressed the maintenance backlog that always is used to say that we're underfunding the parks. I hear the number from $3 billion, $6 billion, $12 billion.
Because it is an ongoing process,
So
as you know.
about how much is out there that has
daily.
not been funded that we need to get to?
we can come back to you with that data. And Dan, you're with the DSC, if you have anything you'd
If
like
I
to
use
add.
the figure of $4 billion, it would not be too far different from what your park. I mean, we've talked about this before, so.
Yes. I do know that the President had put, there was a $4.7 billion ticket put on full maintenance
Yeah,
backlog.
so something
But
in the
however,
$4 to $5 billion range. That's close enough for our discussion if we could depart from that point. Then when I see construction and major maintenance with a negative figure on there, all I can see is that, I mean, we get whipped pretty hard on this side of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, because we don't spend money where it needs to go. And in a budget that's being presented, I see $28 million less at your request, at the request of the department. And I wonder, then it causes me to look at the $282 million net increase and wonder why we chose that. Now, you tell us what $40 million of increased expenditures go. We've had a good discussion about the 3,000 seasonal, but unfortunately, we don't know what the $242 million additional dollars are going to. I know they're going to operations, but what do you foresee? What's important enough in operations that we don't fund backlog maintenance, and we're not even funding major maintenance to $28 million to the negative figure? Why are we doing this?
Thank you for asking that question. I'll just do a little quick overview of what the direct visitor benefit will be.
No.
Please,
I got 5 minutes. I got to get to another committee.
Okay.
I would like to just get some knowledge of what the other $242 million is going for.
There'll be $35 million in preventive maintenance, which is improvements in buildings, housing, campgrounds, trails, unpaved roads, and water utilities. There'll be $1 million going expanding the Junior Ranger program, $3.5 million to bring in to 44 parks VIP coordinators, which will increase the volunteer hours. There will also be $54 million for fixed costs of OMPS.
What are those fixed costs?
The $54 million actually cover the salary increases, rent, utilities.
So $54 million, so we're spending $40 million for seasonal and $54 million for salary increases.
Address this? Because
all right, keep going. I mean,
all right, there's $40.56 million for targeted base parks for their core operations. There will actually be 131 parks that will receive targeted base increases through the Centennial.
What does the base increase go for?
Those base increases will be for various. It'll be for cleaner beaches, cleaner restrooms. It covers a gamut of park operations, sir, that we've had in for increased law enforcement, interpretation programs, maintenance. There will also be, sorry, sir?
Yeah, I mean, we're still a long way away from,
another
give me
$1 million.
A $54 million figure. We still need something in the $100 million range to get this full $242 million kind of where we know what it's going for.
Yes, I can go down the list if you'd like me to.
Just take the big chunks. The 54 is a significant chunk. Don't tell me the $1 million chunks.
Yes, well,
I tell you what, I see my yellow light coming on. I need to get one thing in the record here. We're going to, last year we did the landscape restoration bill, passed out of here with unanimous consent out of the subcommittees, the full committee, and then the floor. Is that something you can support? It's back on the move, headed to the floor sometime or headed to this committee. Can you support that landscape restoration bill that we passed last year?
Do you know the position on that? I cannot tell you at this time, sir, but I'll be glad to
Basically,
come
all
back
we're
to you.
saying is if you cut the trees out of Civil War battlefields that need to be cut by law, they're supposed to be cut, and we're going to allow some of those funds to stay inside that park unit to where they can do maintenance. We're just trying to figure out how to.
I do know there is funding for battlefield restoration in this budget.
I'm asking if you'll support my legislation, ma'am.
I believe we have taken a positive position.
Okay, just get back to me on that because it'd be important to have that in the record. I'm just trying to tie your feet to the ground if you don't mind.
That's all right. I'll be glad to do that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. You've been very gracious with your time. We'll take a look at the rest of those answers. If you can break down what that $242 million goes for, I would appreciate it a lot. Looking forward to working with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. This turn yield time to Ms. Christensen for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your chairmanship of the subcommittee. And welcome, Madam Director. It's good to see you here.
Nice to see you also.
Thanks. And we've discussed many issues. I also have a lot of concern about the backlog and the cuts that we're seeing in that budget. But something came up recently, and I'm going to use this opportunity to ask you about it. In 2002, Congress approved, and this relates to Salt River, and signed legislation that I sponsored to provide for better service and a more rewarding experience for the park visitors at the Salt River National Historical Park, Ecological Park, and Ecological Preserve by expanding the park boundary to include a 2-story home at the site that could be easily converted to a visitor station, museum, operations center, bookstore, and all of the things that we thought were needed. And that facility was sufficient and easily convertible to house enforcement and maintenance personnel as well, and provide for space for all of the park functions. At the time, there was no place in that park and reserve where visitors could go to learn about the park and receive assistance from NPS personnel, and there was no place for the personnel to be. And with the support of your predecessor, we were able to subsequently secure an appropriation to purchase that house to be used as a ranger station and visitor center. But I was just told recently that the National Park Service is now considering changing the authorized use of that house to convert it into housing for NPS personnel on the island. And I feel I have to raise this to let you know that my constituents and I are very concerned about it and really strongly oppose that move. And I'm going to work to make sure that that doesn't happen, that we purchase that house for staff to use for a visitor's center for the museum and for their operations. And I wanted to get your commitment today that there wouldn't be a final decision made on the future use of that site without consulting with the committee and the subcommittee.
Right. Madam Christian, I do not know about that issue, but I certainly will look into it. I will talk with the regional director in the Southeast, and I'd be glad to come back to you respectfully.
Thanks. I needed to, that was just weighing heavy on me this morning. I just had to get that out. I want to ask a question about the Land and Water Conservation Fund, because the President has repeatedly stated his commitment to fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund. $900 million in receipts are deposited into that fund every year. The balance of the fund is expected to reach $16 billion in fiscal year 08. Despite the President's campaign to fully fund it, the 08 request is near an all-time low of $58 million for all federal land acquisition. The Park Service's land acquisition request is just $22.5 million. Could you help us understand why that request is so low, given that the fund is expected to reach $16 billion next year?
Yes, Madam Christensen, again, coming back to and being in the field 16 years, working at many national parks, I come back to the operations of the national parks. You know, our focus has been on park operations, and in keeping with our mission, you know, to preserve our lands unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. The administration is focused on taking care of the sites that we already have in the national park system, but again, providing some key funds, as you know, for Flight 93, and also, Mr. Pierce, as I said a little bit earlier on, in preserving battlefields and other places of significance, historical significance. So again, it really is, it is the park operations that have suffered, and that's where we have really focused our main thrust to make sure that we take care of the visitors and the sites that we already have.
What, you know, as with the ongoing battles with developers, and we run the risk of losing some very valuable historic property that also should be preserved for future generations, not now in the Park Service. And I just find that 22.5 million is extremely low, given that we, am I wrong, that we have the funding in the Land and Water Conservation Fund?
Do you want to address that further, Bruce?
Your numbers are accurate, and both the totals and the annual deposit numbers are accurate. But the way things are scored, of course, is that regardless of how much is deposited in the fund, it all counts as annual budget authority against our allocation and within your rules, I believe, as well. So, regardless of the status of the fund, but your numbers are correct.
Well, a similar question to Mr. Pierce's. What is the sum total of the acquisition backlog as it exists today? Do you know what that is? The total of the in-holdings that are required. We have that number, and we don't have it with us. It's a quite large number. Do you have any more time? I think my time is up for this round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and let me yield 5 minutes to my colleague, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to you for accepting this responsibility, and Ranking Member Bishop for leading this effort, and thanks for holding this hearing today. And Madam Director, we're certainly glad to have you on the team, and I know Ms. Fran Manella is now down in my great state of South Carolina, yes, working, and so we look forward to working with you on your leadership. My question, I guess, is just a follow-up too on land acquisition. I noticed that some of the money designated is for Pennsylvania, where the crash.
Yes, sir.
Could you give me a breakdown of where the other, I think it's $22 million altogether, and I think that takes care of about $6 million or so, and $5 million. So where are the other $17 million will be spent?
Go ahead.
Roughly 4 of it is going to the program the director mentioned for Civil War battlefields.
And what states are they in?
It's a variety of states. It's mostly in the east, in areas you would expect associated with Civil War battlefield site preservation. And the balance of the fund, there's some money that is made available for in-holding purchase, small in-holding purchase, emergency and hardships, and the balance is for administration.
Hey, do you know where the in-holdings are, what states the in-holdings are in?
Again, they vary. They tend to be opportunistic when there's willing sellers, and we don't have a specific program at this point as to where they might occur.
Okay. I know that we've got a bill going through the legislature to address the park here in Washington for Francis Marion, and I was just going to get some update from you on that. I know it's been kind of in disrepair, and I guess part of the bill is to reactivate that location. Are you familiar with it?
No, I'm not, sir, but I will certainly look into it and come back to you on that.
Okay, very good. I know I think we're going to have it on a suspension calendar next week.
Okay.
To address that, we brought it up last year, and I guess it died before the session ended, and so this would be.
All right.
Something.
I'll be glad to look into that for you,
okay,
and I'll come back to you.
Well, we have Fort Sumter down in Charleston. We have a lot of historical buildings, in my district, and so we're anxious to work with you on some of those efforts. And
absolutely, we look forward to that as well, sir.
And I thank you. Now you back to balance my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Let me yield 5 minutes to Mr. Sarbanes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations. I come from Maryland's 3rd District, and one of our treasures is Fort McHenry, which in many respects showcases all the different dimensions of what the National Park Service has to offer the public. We have wetland restoration area in there. We've got beautiful vistas of the Chesapeake Bay, of course, and the historic legacy of Fort McHenry is well known to the nation, of course. I would like to ask some more questions. You've already received some on this maintenance backlog, because my concern is that the message not be conveyed that we can compensate for a failure to address the backlog by increasing the sort of operational funding that's there. You really need both pieces to make it work, to make the experience of enjoying our national parks all that it can be, really. In fact, my experience has been that if you talk to rangers in some of these parks where the backlog has not been addressed, they will tend to express their own frustration about it. So if you've got more rangers in a park that's not being maintained or repaired, that message may get conveyed with more intensity. The experience for the park goer is to come away thinking something's not right here. So is it $4 to $5 billion of backlog that we're talking about, as was suggested a moment ago by my colleague? Is that the number that we're talking about? And what annually is the amount in the proposed budget that's addressing that backlog?
Fort McHenry, thank you. Fort McHenry, sir, I'd just like to say and address that. We have a terrific superintendent there, as you know, Gay Vitsky, who's doing a great job. And I have visited that park many times. The Fort McHenry National Monument and Historic Shrine, for example, there is an increase in this budget of $285,000 with 3 new full-time personnel positions. And it is basically geared towards preserve and maintain historic structures and cultural landscapes. Again, our superintendents, we know much more about our historic structures than we've ever known in the National Park Service. We have asset management in place now. We have all completed, all the parks have now completed a comprehensive inventory assessment of their historic structures and their facilities within their parks. So, and again, we've used very strongly the fee demonstration program, as you know, the repair, rehab, line item construction to improve many of our facilities. This budget really does, it has given the 133 parks that have received significant increases, and I can go through state by state, and I'd be glad to provide you with those figures. But the superintendent...
With respect to the backlog items you're talking about, or with respect to the operation?
And they are ongoing. Those projects go into a system within the National Park Service, a database system, and each day they get added to. You know, when our employees, our maintenance staff go into facilities, you know, they will write up work orders, so that increases almost on a daily basis. But we can come back to you and provide you with those
I'm sure it does increase on a daily basis. The question is whether we are addressing it with sufficient resources on a daily or at least annual basis, and I think there's a gap there. But let me switch gears real quick because I'm going to run out of time. The Centennial Challenge, just so I understand that, the idea is to create a federal source of funding that would match up to $100 million a year of private philanthropy to support the National Park System over a 10-year period. Is that right?
That's correct, sir, yes. Part of, you know, again, coming back to my experience in the field, that I was the superintendent of Independence for 3.5 years, and through my 16 years service, 17 years service, many of our philanthropic partners have come to us to say, you know, there should be a federal investment to match many of our donations. I worked on one of the largest urban redevelopments in America. It was over a $300 million project at Independence, and all but $60 million of that was through private donations. The Penn Foundation, Pew Foundation, Jerry Lenfest, many of the foundations wanted to make sure that that the federal government put a portion in to truly be partners working together.
I see where currently the annual donations are about $27 million coming
20
to the
in cash,
National
that's right.
Park Service. So is it a reasonable or fair expectation from the private sector that they be getting to $100 million in order to access a similar amount from the federal side?
Yes, absolutely. That potential is absolutely out there. We have heard 30 of our national parks have been created through donations from the Rockefeller, Acadia, Vanderbilt, I think. There's many national parks that have been provided through donation. As soon as the Centennial was launched by the President at Shenandoah, and prior to that, as we talked about the Centennial, we received a challenge automatically from the Pew Foundation in Philadelphia, challenging the President to, if he puts $5 million into an account, that they would match that, the Pew Foundation, with other partners, state, public and private partnerships in Philadelphia, an $18 million project to rehabilitate the underground Ben Franklin Museum in Philadelphia. There are many partners
Right.
throughout our national parks that are willing to step up with many programs. There would be no risk to the federal government. The operation sustainability is already in place. So that is a tremendous program and project that we would like to see.
I see that my time is up, Mr. Chairman, and I worry that I mean, there's a benefit side to this, but if projects that ought to be paid for by the federal government do not get paid for because the private side is not able to step up at the levels you're expecting, then we're hurting our park system. I'll yield.
Thank you, sir. And let me yield 5 minutes to Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know that we're going to be very careful and looking at and scrutinizing the budget that's being presented. But I do want to say that I think there are many good things that the National Park Service is doing, and I want to compliment you. Like many Americans, I love the National Park System. I've been to over 130 of the units that are out there and hope to go to all the rest eventually. So I just want to be working with you as we go forward on this. And for the balance of my time, I'm going to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Lamborn.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado for his comments and for yielding as well. Let me try and zero in on one question. I recognize with all our parks and sites that if no one sees them, they have no value.
Right.
You got to go there, otherwise it's not a purpose of just having them sitting around. One of the problems that you are facing is that there has been a declining visitation in our national park system, and the demographic is changing as well. There are not enough young people coming into the park system. And to be honest, I think there are forces out there that like that system of trying to have fewer and fewer visitations. But I see that as a net negative. So what I would like to know are two things possibly. One is, have you been able to zero in on what you think are the causes of that, whether it's simply gas prices, what is it, Sesame Street's trained kids that, you know, if the visual doesn't change in 9 seconds, they change the channel. Is there something you've been able to zero in on? And secondly, is there within your department, or what steps are you taking to try and change the mentality of the service to try and be more visitor friendly, to encourage people, especially young people, to come into the parks and experience that?
Thank you for both those questions, sir. Many of our parks are now and have been dedicated to introducing new programs, and that we are aware and are, in fact, looking at further surveys to see why people aren't coming to national parks. However, I will say that the national parks received over 273 million visits this last year, and the statistics just came out. And many of our, in fact, we've done some analysis, and if you look at football, baseball, NASCAR, Disney, all combined, the national parks receive more visitors today. And you're right, sir, about demographics changing, about bringing children back to nature, and being ready for the 21st century, and being more inviting. Throughout my whole career, I have been known as being very visitor-oriented. It was very important at every park that I was at, and I know many of those superintendents, I've worked with those superintendents for years, feel the same way. Have we been a little bit autonomous during our tenure? Absolutely, sir. And we need to be more inviting and more welcome to the American public. And we are looking at ways, and this budget does cover that, where there is $1 million in the Junior Ranger program. Mrs. Bush herself has become a tremendous advocate for the national parks. And through the Junior Ranger program, through this budget, we will now be getting more junior web rangers. They can go online and go through the Junior Ranger program at various parks and become certified Junior Rangers. Yes, we have to look at modern technology. Children today are just menu-driven. They want everything instantly. But we have to be more attractable also to our parks, to bring people back to parks. And we will focus on that.
Director, I appreciate that very much, and I do realize perhaps every park, every site is going to be different.
Yes.
And I think we're going to be talking about this more and more as time goes on. I do recognize, though, that what we need to do in the Park Service is to make sure that in some places where there seems to be an attitude that you really don't want more people there, you don't want them to have the autonomy of being able to explore on their own,
Yes.
that in some of our specific parks we need to have a more business model approach, with the goal of how do we actually get people wanting to come in here and spending more time. And I appreciate the service looking in that direction and moving in that direction even before you came here. But I'm confident that you're going to continue that direction and that pattern, and we will see those visitation going up, especially getting a new generation moving in here.
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree with you, sir. And we will be focused on that in my new efforts during my tenure.
Thank you. I think that's important. I realize my time's almost up on this round, and thank you for that comment. Thank you, the
very
gentleman
much,
from Colorado.
Mr. Bishop, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Let me yield 5 minutes to Ms. Capps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and Director Bomar, thank you for your excellent service and for your testimony today. I have a series of questions to ask you concerning the management of Santa Rosa Island, which is part of the Channel Islands National Park, a very important part of my congressional district in California.
Yes.
Santa Rosa Island has a long and complicated history. But in 1986, taxpayers paid almost $30 million to acquire the island to be managed as part of the national park. However, a pre-existing commercial hunting operation of non-native deer and elk on Santa Rosa continues today under a court-ordered settlement agreement. The Park Service, Justice Department, and the National Parks Conservation Association entered into an agreement with the Vail and Vickers family, who own the herds then and today, and were the recipients of this $30 million. The agreement was entered into that is in place today. The commercial hunting operation closes off 90% of this island for 5 to 6 months of the year while the hunting is underway. Under the settlement agreement, hunting is scheduled to wind down over the next several years and cease completely in 2011. At that time, the island will be managed like every other national park, allowing for public recreation while protecting the island's native plants and animal species. As you know, the President's 2008 budget request includes an increase in park operations and construction funding for the Channel Islands National Park, which includes $9.3 million to replace a 700-foot pier on Santa Rosa Island. My question first is how you believe this pier will enhance visitor access, given that under the current court-ordered settlement agreement, the agreement allowing for commercial hunting, 90% of the island is off limits for 5 to 6 months out of the year. I mean, how does this set with the pier enhancement, which by its own design is meant to increase the opportunities for people to visit the island?
Right, and I'm going to defer to Dan Wenk, who has been the head of the Denver Service Center and who has been working on this project.
Okay.
Dan, if you have some comments.
To speak specifically about the pier is obviously it's in bad disrepair.
Yes.
It needs to be fixed in order to provide any access or reliable access to the island at all. We're looking at, in the design phases, we know because of the wave action studies that have been done that the pier has to be raised about 11 feet in height, and we will look at the length to make sure we're building the most efficient pier that we can, for access to the public.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to get through my questions. And let me ask the same kind of question a different way. Presently, about 5,000 visitors are there each year on Santa Rosa Island because they only can visit during a few months out of the year. Then let's look at it this way. With the agreement coming to fruition, the court agreement at 2011, plus the enhancement of the pier, how do you see the opportunities for visitation growth to occur at Santa Rosa Island?
Go ahead.
I believe those visitation growth is going to be dependent upon services that will be provided to bring people to the island itself. The question of the closure of the island, 90% of the island closed
Exactly.
for those months of the year, that is the question that we're trying to resolve and figure out how we will come back and manage that transition.
Right, and in truth, the most attractive time to visit the island is during the very time that it's closed, because that's when the hunters also want to be there. And the purpose of the pier is to enhance access to the island, the pier enhancement project, which is now in the budget for improvement. Well, another way to ask it, what will happen if the pier enhancement project is not funded?
It's in the budget to be funded in 2008. We are actively working on the design to improve the pier. It's our anticipation that it
Okay,
will be
so
funded.
you don't see any way that that's going to not be funded and not the project will be completed?
I believe that we are going to, as we always do, build that project within available funds and on
All right.
schedule.
Thank you. Finally, and I've asked the chairman if I could ask an additional concluding question. What is the Park Service's position on the Hunter Amendment stating that the deer and elk will not be eliminated or nearly eliminated? In other words, what is the harm in your assessment with leaving the deer and the elk on the island as the Hunter Amendment provides?
We have our Department of Interior solicitors are reviewing that right now, and we will wait we will work with our department for interpretation.
If I could conclude by saying, Mr. Chairman, 60% of all visitors to Santa Rosa Island come during the hunting season. It's the best time of year to visit, yet the public is strictly limited to only 10% of the island. I think this is outrageous. I think we could imagine what it would be like during high season for visitors to Yosemite or Yellowstone if we restricted visits to 10% of that, if either of those national parks, and so only a few people could enjoy their lucrative private hunt. Efforts to interfere with the court-ordered settlement agreement to open the entire island year-round, I believe, are unfair to the public, and I hope our subcommittee will closely examine this issue in order that we can fulfill our mission to protect public access to all national parks, and in this case, the Channel Islands National Park. Thank you for allowing me to run over time, and thank you.
Thank you. Let me yield 5 minutes to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Young.
I thank the chairman, and the thing I'd like to follow what Ms. Capps has said, I support the Hunter provision. And your solicitor can look at it, but if the decision is wrong, it will be appealed because the law is very specific. I'm one that believes that this herd is very valuable to the ecosystem. And by the way, it can be used as an attraction for tourists that go there. There's not much on that island, and I've been there 2 times. There's not much there.
When you're finished, I would like to, if you would yield to me, since it's not in my district.
It is your district, but it's also a resource. And my interest in this is a disease-free herd of mule deer and elk. And we have a problem in the West in some of our parks right now. Mr. Udall has introduced a bill to allow hunting on parks. Senator Dorgan has introduced a bill to do the same thing. We have a management problem in a lot of our parks because of the anti-hunting movement. And I'm going to respectfully say that that is probably the finest herd of elk and deer that I've ever been around. Now, whether it's a private hunting operation or what, I'm not going to argue that point. If you want to make it public, as Mr. Hunter tried to do, I think that'd be right. But hunting is a management tool on our parks. And it may be your district, but it's also a fact that we are now faced with disease herds in some areas of the United States, and this herd is not, and it can be used as an additive to the existing herds that are diseased, so we can take and straighten out the herds. And there's one question I'd like to ask you, and you can answer it in time and paper. How much money did you spend in trying to reestablish the, I believe it's the ring-tailed cat or whatever it is there? You have a lab there. Do you have any idea how much money's been spent to try to reintroduce that predator?
Sir, I don't. I will come back to you. I will answer that question for you. I've been here just 5 months, but we will come back to you, sir, with that.
Now, getting away from Santa Rosa Island, we have the largest amount of parks in the United States are in Alaska. You're doing better than you were, the service. Because there was a time there, many of the personnel within the Park Service decided that it was their park and not people's parks. And I've always said people and partners are very dear.
Yeah,
and you're doing better. One of the still complaints I have is the personnel policy of hiring people within your organization and sending them to Alaska instead of trying to get Alaskans to be park rangers, especially in Anatovik Pass. We had, park rangers there instead of local people. And the comment was, well, they don't have enough knowledge to do what they have to do. But they live there, and they know the area better than any place else. And I just want to encourage your regional park ranger to continue to try to strive to get local people trained, not necessarily from Massachusetts or California or Washington State, but from Alaska, so they can work in one of the areas that is of great attraction for the state. Denali is the biggest, of course, but the rest of the parks are very inaccessible, and it takes a great deal of money to get there. And so as we created those parks in this committee, I had hoped at that time that we'd have the personnel actually from Alaska.
You're absolutely right, sir. And the 3,000 seasonal positions that will be coming on board with the Centennial Challenge, this is exactly what it'll do. It'll open up opportunities for students, for interns, and for people to apply for positions that will get the experience and knowledge to be able to compete working with national parks. And also the volunteer program. There'll be 44 parks that will receive volunteer coordinators. And we hope that, too, will bring in the young to work in our parks, the young folks.
And now yield to the good lady.
Thank you.
I appreciate the honorable member from Alaska for yielding to me, and we've had conversation in the past. I just have 3 points, if I could make, in response to some of your comments. I don't dispute the fact that these are valuable animals. They are the property of the particular family that has owned them and still does own them. And because they've been isolated, I don't dispute that. And I believe that Superintendent Russell Gallipo has offered and worked with the family to safely remove them from the island to a place where they could be protected in the future. In actuality, the hunt itself threatens their lives. And in fact, the pier enhancement could be a part of the solution of removing them safely and carefully from the island. Second point, in contrast to the Dorgan-Udall legislation, which is an effective, perhaps, way to manage a balance in a public land, those herds are native herds. In the case of Santa Rosa Island, these are non-native animals, and we're part of a domestic operation there that included also cattle. The cattle have been removed. This island, because of its remoteness and particular cultural and anthropological value, it's been protected over the years, but it has been threatened by the cattle and the elk and deer.
Reclaiming my time, let's go back to history. What was the island originally used for and by whom?
It was owned by the families.
No.
It was a ranch.
It was owned by the Spanish to begin with. They're the ones that put the put the sheep on the island. They put the cattle on the island. They put the pigs on the island, and that island has been utilized as an island for agricultural relations and livestock forever.
Sir,
now you want to take that island and put it back to the pristine size or what it was before man ever existed.
One of the earliest
not
species
anything
of man
on that island. There's nothing on that island. Nothing. The animals that are there were planted, other than that one predator cat that you spent thousands of dollars to try to reintroduce, because when you killed the pigs, they all died off.
That's a different
island,
island,
they had nothing to eat. The island it has no trees. It is a barren island, and it is a barren island. Now, like you say, it's not. I say it's a barren island. And to say that now that you can't have other animals there because they were planted by man is dead wrong.
If I could,
my opinion.
I think one time's up, and quick response, Ms. Capps, and then
thank you very much,
go on to
because there is a species of fox, the island fox. It only exists on Santa Rosa Island. There are a number of vegetations.
They have died off because you took the pigs
I saw
off.
them. No, the pigs are on Santa Cruz Island. I have seen, and there is a restoration process going on to save this almost extinct species. There are several other species of plant and animal that only exist in that area, and that is the purpose, in my opinion, of the Park Service, is to maintain the access to it.
Thank you. Let me call on my colleague, yield 5 minutes. Ms. Hertzler.
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva, and I appreciate this opportunity to meet Director Bomar and to pose a few questions about the National Park Service proposed FY08 budget request. I represent the entire state of South Dakota, and as you know, we have a number of treasures managed by the National Park Service, including the Badlands National Park, Wind Cave, and Mount Rushmore National Memorial. I just about said my favorite, which it is. But I may get in trouble now with my friends at the Badlands National Park. But our national parks in South Dakota, I think, could really benefit from the proposed Centennial Challenge.
Absolutely.
As long as it's administered, in my opinion, in a way that addresses some of the concerns that Mr. Sarbanes already raised. And so I do have a few questions with you about the proposal. When does the administration plan to submit a plan to formally outline the details of this program?
For the Centennial Challenge?
Yes.
Before, the report is due to the President at the end of May. But before we make decisions on signature projects, we have a series of listening sessions that will start in March, that we will go out to the American public and seek their ideas and recommendations about what we should be doing with our national parks. And talk to, sorry.
Oh, and will the report then at the end of May, in addition to gathering information and ideas and suggestions during the listening sessions, well, I think that's a very good idea.
Yes.
Will that include estimates on how much you expect to raise through private donations?
Yes, it will. Once we hear from the American public what the programs are, there was a donation just came in that I signed off on last night talking about the trails in California. An anonymous donor has put about $19 million into trails in California. So, and that was something that we did not know about. So there's many opportunities out there. So we want to make sure that we do include people, collaborate and be communicative, and make sure that we seek their input and ideas. And it was actually outlined in the President's proclamation to do that.
Okay. Was this anonymous donation specifically in response to the announcement of the Centennial Challenge?
No, that's what I say. I don't think we even know what potential there is tremendous potential. Many of us in the national parks know the potential, but we have not really gone out to seek those ideas yet. And we don't want to do that until we hear from the American public.
Okay. I appreciate that. You know, the number of questions were posed earlier about the construction and major maintenance account. And again, Mr. Sarbanes had raised some issues here, you know, about the federal government's responsibility first and foremost, using limited federal resources to allocate to our national parks the needs to preserve these treasures, to enhance the experience for visitors in different ways. So what criteria, I'm going to pose these questions and then I'm going to give you a specific example.
Yes.
For an idea of where I think the criteria are going to be particularly important here because of the projects that may qualify as a signature project, but yet they have a relationship with a construction project. I mean, they have to move sort of on a parallel track to be able to enhance the visitor experience, but at the same time address construction needs that really aren't part of the visitor experience. I'm interested if you could share at all right now the criteria that the Park Service might use to award the matching funds and how that might be prioritized. For example, can you use matching dollars to maintain and upgrade a park sewer system, or is it going to be limited to projects like new visitor centers, historic preservation, renovation? For example, at the Mount Rushmore National Memorial, we have this treasure of a sculptor's studio. And in the basement of it is a maintenance facility. And it really negatively affects the visitor's experience. And if we were able to build a new maintenance facility, you could enhance dramatically the visitor's experience by coming down and experiencing more of what the sculptor studio has to offer. But if you have our society, you know, the Friends of the Park, looking to help raise private donations for the renovation, restoration, and enhancing the sculptor studio, what do? You know, in my opinion, it's the National Park Service responsibility more than it should be the Friends of the park to build a new maintenance facility.
Yes, and it could be as part of a project. However, again, I come back to this gentleman on my left was the superintendent at Mount Rushmore.
Yes, I know. Yes, I think he's familiar with
yes.
what I'm speaking of.
A great superintendent. And that park alone, I know, Dan, under your tenure, there was $60 million through private donations. That could be part of the project. But I must say, knowing Dan and his experience and the superintendent that's there now, that probably is already in the system for an upgrade if that affects a project. Dan, would you like to address that one?
Currently, the new maintenance facility is in the National Park Service system, which is one of the criterias that we will use in terms of looking at projects. We are not going to, I don't believe that we will look at projects that we do not believe are beneficial overall to a park area. If it's not within an approved planning document for a park, it probably would not be considered. Your particular case, that is in an approved planning document. It is in within the prioritization system of the National Park Service.
And I would like to say that national parks in South Dakota, there are 10 parks that will be receiving a total in this budget of over $5 million in targeted base increases, which is unheard of. It's something we have not had in over a decade.
You won't hear me complaining about that, Madam Director, but, and I appreciate that. My time is up, but if I make one final comment here, and I appreciate the clarification, because if it's a planned project, but because of the backlog, if it's further down the list than we would like, I think the Centennial Challenge allows us to work with the different alliances, the societies that are out there doing the private money to address not only what we can do to help alleviate the backlog, but promote renovation, restoration. I would just commend to you the letter that I'm sure you've seen to Secretary Kempthorne from the Alliance, the National Park Friends Alliance, and the recommendations, and commend you not only to all of them that are very good, but number 2 and number 5 in particular, I think are very important, and I hope will make their way into the criteria established and recommended in the May report.
And Kirk Buckholz from the Alliance, we work very closely with the Alliance. They're friends to the national parks to work through and give them some clarity on some of the recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman.
Yield 5 minutes to Mr. Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask some questions about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The authorized level per annum for the Land and Water Conservation Fund established by Congress is $900 million per year, and there's an overall balance in that fund of $16 billion, and you're asking for $22.5 million for land acquisition, and the overall request for money from that fund overwide in the whole government is $58 million. Does that $22.5 million for the Park Service meet your needs or your priorities?
Again, sir, I will come back to what the needs that has been expressed by our superintendents, our employees, that the greatest need was in operations. And that's where we have placed the special emphasis, again, on being good stewards of the land already that the National Park Service manages, and to make sure that, that we have lifeguards in the seasons, that we have cleaner restrooms, cleaner bathrooms, and that visitors can come to national parks and leave with memorable experiences like I did as a child coming over to this country, visiting the Grand Canyon and many other parks. So again, I come back to it was the greatest need was the operations for the national parks.
And no one disagrees with you on the quality of operations. I've served in the Congress for 30 years, and I've been urging, the operations be kept up to par and improved. But at the same time, there must be some areas where you have some desire either to straighten the boundaries out, to acquire some land that might enhance the experience. And yet we have, $900 million a year, which is authorized, and government-wide, it's only $58 million is being taken from that $900 million, and there's a $16 billion fund there. Let me ask you something more specific on that, affecting my state of Michigan. The Motor Cities National Heritage Area in Detroit, Michigan, is there any centered in Detroit, Michigan? It's broader than that.
Great partnership, sir.
Right. And is there any need for any money for land acquisition for that heritage area?
No, I don't believe there is on land acquisition. I know that, again, that's a great heritage area, great partnership, and many of our heritage areas yield 6 to 1 for every federal dollar that comes into the heritage areas. And I would like to say, Mr. Crombie, that looking at this over this last couple of years, we, in the Pacific West, for example, we have had terrible flood and storm damage over the last couple of years, that certainly, again, has put an emphasis on other areas in the national parks, just the emergency funding alone for the Pacific West, in the South as well. Terrible hurricane season. In the Northeast, we've had ice storms. So,
but this money is really for land acquisition, a land and water conservation fund. And again, is there any need for anything for the
you want to address that?
for the motor cities?
Not that,
Congressman, I don't know that there's a land acquisition component to the Motor City Heritage Area offhand. We certainly can find out.
I certainly would hope so. Mr. Dingle and I have worked very hard on that, and the Michigan delegation. So if you could see whether there is any need for land acquisition
yes,
to
so there is no, not to my knowledge, any land acquisition in any of the heritage areas. We have 37 heritage areas, and I don't believe there is any land acquisition with heritage areas, sir. There has not been any defined.
okay, if you could specifically verify that, I certainly appreciate that.
Absolutely, sir.
That's
yes.
your feeling now. How about the North Country National Scenic Trail, which cuts across 7 states from New York to North Dakota through Michigan? Is there any need for a land acquisition for that North Country National Scenic Trail?
I really couldn't say at this point, but I will come back to you, sir, and answer your question. I will say to you that with the Centennial Challenge, there is targeted right now $326,000 in targeted base increases. There will be 3 parks that will receive seasonal employees, 19 in maintenance, 17 in interpretation, and 7 in law enforcement. And also VIP positions at Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, and also the North Country National Scenic Trail. So I do know there will be a VIP coordinator that will receive funding there for that position, sir.
All right, I would ask you if you could give some information to this committee on that. And I know the budget process. As I say, I've been here 30 years, and I know you have to kind of fight back and forth with OMB and make your request, and have to make adjustments. But and I know you will be a great advocate for funds for the Park Service.
Yes,
but
sir,
if you could, where there is need for land acquisition, if you could make your voice even a little stronger. But I am pleased with your work.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yield 5 minutes to Mr. Holt, and we're approaching a vote pretty soon. We're going to try to get through at least this round of questioning for everybody. Mr. Holt.
Thank you, and thank you, Director Bomar, for coming today. In coming weeks and months, I will want to talk with you about heritage areas, and in particular the Crossroads of the American Revolution Heritage Area, and about Everglades management, and of course about the maintenance backlog in many of the park facilities. But let me turn to some more general comments here first, or questions. Secretary Kempthorne last year said, when there's a conflict between the protection of resources and use, conservation for the enjoyment of these special places must and will prevail. He said that is the heart of the policies that he was setting forth. He also said that NPS managers must always seek ways to avoid and to minimize to the greatest degree practicable adverse effects on park resources and values. And he said, the service will seek to perpetuate the best possible air quality in parks. Do you agree with all of those statements, and are you seeking to put those into practice?
Yes, I do, sir. Again, I say to you, coming from the field, the National Park Service policies were a tool on my desk that we used, and that, as you know, many career, there was tremendous civic engagement and involvement with the revision of the management policies, and there will be no further changes needed to the policies.
As you know, today is the 135th anniversary of Yellowstone National Park, a true jewel in the American crown. I would hope that these policies will guide the final choice for the best form of winter access in Yellowstone Park. And let me elaborate a little bit. You know, the 2006 management policy said the Park Service will seek to perpetuate the best possible air quality in parks. It said where such use is necessary and appropriate, the least impacting equipment, vehicles, and transportation systems shall be used. You have a study, yet another study underway now of winter access in Yellowstone Park. With regard to air quality, Alternative 1, current plan would provide carbon monoxide 5 times what would be provided by Alternative 2, snow coaches only. Hydrocarbon emission, 17 times more if you use the current plan rather than snow coaches only. The management policies also say the National Park Service will preserve to the greatest extent possible the natural soundscapes of parks. Yet, in this study, alternative one would provide 76 square miles of park area that would be impacted by sound more than 50% of the time, which is more than twice the area that would be affected by alternative two, the environmentally attractive snow coaches. The decision to phase out snowmobiles in Yellowstone was, well, in the words of the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, a judgment forged in years of honest research and earnest debate. Yet, the Park Service proceeded to bend both research and rulemaking to serve its political objective. The Denver Post said, if one needs any further evidence that some in the government have no new thoughts about managing our public lands, take a look at the latest snowmobile plan for Yellowstone National Park. It proposes allowing as many as 720 snowmobile machines per day, more than approximately three times what is currently accessing Yellowstone Park. The administration has been pushing for years to expand the number of snowmobiles allowed in the park. The latest plan is preliminary. We hope it doesn't survive further review. The Great Falls Tribune says 1, 2, 3, 4 major studies, and now we're getting back to the budgetary questions before us today. 4 major studies in 2000, 2002, 2004, and now another one of snowmobile use in Yellowstone Park. And what do we get, according to the Great Falls Tribune? The same results and even a bigger bill to taxpayers. Why does the Park Service keep trying to do studies until they get the answer they want? 1, 2, 3, 4 major scientific studies of snowmobile use in Yellowstone Park, and what do we get? The same results and an even bigger bill to taxpayers. Let's face the facts. If we are going to observe Mr. Kempthorne's policies, which should be the policies of the National Park Service, that when there is a conflict, conservation prevails, then face facts. We can provide access to Yellowstone in the winter in a much more environmentally friendly and conserving manner. We are not excluding people. In fact, even today, with the old policies in place, or these contorted policies of the Park Service, we have nearly as many people accessing Yellowstone in the winter using environmentally attractive snow coaches as we have on individual or dual passenger snowmobiles. It works. People like it. What is the resistance?
Could we give the witness a chance to respond?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, as you know, there has been much controversy over the snowmobile issue at Yellowstone, sir. But let me say to you that Suzanne Lewis is a senior, seasoned superintendent that is working at Yellowstone. And as you know, right now, there is a draft EIS that has been reviewed. It is online by the cooperating associations, agencies, and that is now going out to public comment. So we need to make sure that we include the American public for their comment. The comment period starts at the end of March. It goes out for 60 days, and a record of decision
Can you
should
tell
be forthcoming
me,
by the
Madam
end.
Director, how much these 4 studies have cost the Park Service?
I cannot tell you that at this
I can
moment,
tell
sir,
you,
but
$10 million. Just think what we could do with those $10 million. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. And there's another round of questioning. 5 minutes, yield 5 minutes to Mr. Heller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield my time to the ranking member.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think one of the things, Director Bomar, that you have seen with this, the questions here today, is you have conflicting directives that are coming at you. The gentlelady from California just said how terrible it is when you try and close her island to just 10%, and the rest of it is they're closed off for the participation and enjoyment of people. And then I think we've also had the other conversation where they said, well, closing it off is perhaps the right thing to do. I think we go back to the same concept that we always had before, that the purpose of a park is for public participation, and that if indeed we are not encouraging public participation, then we are we're destroying the intact and very purpose for which those parks exist in the first place. I would have to say that one of the strangest phrases I have now heard is an environmentally attractive snow coach. If that's not a contradiction of terms, I don't know what is. They are lousy. You can't see, they belch out smoke, you can't hear, you can't discuss. There is nothing that detracts people from attending parks more than an environmentally attractive snow coach. So I realize, once again, it's extremely important. We have people, when we talked about the fact that there is a declining park enrollment, visitation, part of it is the perception that people are not welcome in these parks in certain time periods. And as we increase in our technology, this is one of the things that we do have to work to get those people back here and to get young people back into our parks, is to recognize that they are going to be welcomed by the facilities, the amenities, as well as the opportunity to see the entire park. And with that, I'm trying desperately to find out how I put a question mark at the end of that sentence. There is none. I think we could probably save time. I know you have one member on your side who has yet to ask a question. We'll have a chance to go back over this, but I recognize now the problem that you do have in conflicting ideas, and I think there needs to be some aspect of what is the purpose of a park in the first place. And with that, I'll simply yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Yield 5 minutes, Mr. Schuler.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Director Bomar, thank you for being here. I represent the western North Carolina region, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park area.
Yes.
I'm sure you're, even with 5 months in,
yes,
you're very familiar with probably the North Shore Road, or what I like to refer it to as locals call it, it's the road to nowhere. There was some $14 million spent on an environmental impact study. Right. The draft was released over a year ago. When do you expect the final version of the documentation to be released?
Thank you. And yes, I do know that great park. And Dale Dipmanson is the superintendent, and he used to work with me in the Northeast. But Dan, I know that you have been working on this project. If you'd like to address it.
Mr. Schuler, I cannot give you right now the specific dates. I know we did have a briefing within the last month from the superintendent and staff. It is on one of the priorities that we're looking at to determine how we're going to move that project forward and make the determinations as will come out of the environmental impact statement and the work that's being done.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, I mean, this has been an ongoing problem. It's really divided my community, particularly my hometown, which this road actually is in Swain County, where I grew up. It's divided since 1943, so over 60 years we've been fighting, whether the road should be built or whether there should be a settlement. Has there been any provisions at all that the Park Service has taken in regards to a budget for a settlement to Swain County?
I'll address that. I do know that Dale has been working with the federal highways, with the city and the state of North Carolina and the public to develop a solution. And from what I think the last briefing, Dan, as you've said, hopefully by the end of the year that they will come up with a decision on that, sir.
I would really, because this has divided our community for decades now. Spending $600 million on building this road, my personal opinion, is not the solution. The settlement to Swain County, I think, would be much needed. 83% of our county is actually composed of public lands. We need some certainly relief. We do, however, gain a lot from our tourism industry. Yes. But for our tax dollars, our tax base, we don't gain a lot of money from the public lands other than our tourism industry. So it would be really good for us to get some financial relief that the county's been needed for quite some time.
To your question you asked earlier about a provision, there is no special provision for the settlement figure that in the range that's been discussed in the past. So it would have to be appropriated and would have to be subject to the limitations of the budget that we've sent over, and would probably have to be included in future budget requests. But it clearly would be a sizable hit in the Park Service budget.
One other question: the woolly dalesia, the problem that we're having with our eastern hemlocks. In looking at the budget for the fiscal year 2008, how much funding has been for the pesticide to be able to, I mean, it really is playing havoc to our mountains, the eastern hemlocks and also the balsams.
Right, and we can get that information for you specifically about the hemlocks, but I will say to you in the budget, in the Centennial Initiative, that 2 parks will be receiving over $724,000 in park increases. 9 parks will receive seasonal employees, 65 maintenance, 49 interpretation, 36 law enforcement, 16 subject to furlough positions, and also VIP coordinators. They have done a brilliant job in bringing in volunteers to work at the parks in North Carolina. I know the Appalachian National Scenic Trail, Blue Ridge Parkway, Great Smoky Mountains National Park will all be receiving funds towards VIP coordinators. And I know that there are construction projects also planned for Cape Hatteras and also Blue Ridge Parkway. The Centennial Challenge, again, has certainly provided, coming back to the base increases that the parks have asked for. So it could be included in that, but we will come back to you, sir.
Very good. And of course, we're the most visited national park in the country, so we just want to make sure that we get our fair share of the budget.
I think we do a great job working with the community and with tourism and the folks there. You've got some great superintendents, sir.
Yes, we do. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, sir. Yield 5 minutes to the second round to Mr. Holt.
Thank you, and I will save heritage areas and maintenance backlog for later, and let me continue to pursue the winter use of Yellowstone. First, I would like to address the 2 points that my colleague made. One has to do with whether the snow coaches are more environmentally friendly than the individual use snowmobiles. And don't get me wrong, I've used both. I enjoy both. I enjoy snowmobiling. There are just some places that the environmental effect is unacceptable. There's some things you do not do in national parks, even though they are enjoyable. You don't hang glide from Teddy Roosevelt's nose. You don't, I can go on with other lists of things. But is it not the case that this preliminary environmental review says that with snowmobiles, more than twice the area would have auditable engine noise more than half the time with the alternative 1 snowmobiles than with alternative 2?
Mr. Holt, I'm going to have to defer that question. I cannot answer that question at the moment. It is inappropriate for me, as the Director of the National Park Service, to make a comment at this time during the environmental impact statement. That's exactly right, sir.
And I would ask you in due course then to address also the air quality. Just choosing air quality and sound alone should be reason enough for you to make the decision that should have been made after each of the previous studies to phase out the inappropriate, environment-impinging transportation systems, rather than calling for still another study. The other point that my colleague made was that we have to encourage use. I agree. These parks should be enjoyed. Absolutely. There are, as I commented earlier, nearly as many people today in the winter accessing Yellowstone by snow coach than by the individual snowmobile vehicles. They like snow coaches. Let's make that the mechanism of visits and save the snowmobiles for outside the park. Furthermore, even if it were not environmentally preferable, and even if we couldn't preserve adequate access to Yellowstone Park, the Kempthorne policy says if there is a conflict between protection of resources and use, conservation must and will prevail. That seems pretty clear to me when you match that with the data that one alternative does not preserve the resources and the other does. So I would ask you, Madam Director, if when you review this once again study, whether you will take the conclusions and select the alternative that the science demonstrates is best for Yellowstone's environment and wildlife and will preserve the natural conditions of the park.
Thank you, Mr. Holt.
Now, that was a question. Will you choose that alternative?
We will. As we come back to management policies, there was a lot of time spent with career folks out in the field and much civic engagement in the final product that everybody seemed very happy about. And the final statement that you've made is conservation will be predominant is absolutely true, sir.
So you will heed the scientific conclusions and select the alternative that the science demonstrates is best for Yellowstone's environment and wildlife and will preserve the natural conditions of the park.
Yes, we will, sir. The record of decision will reflect that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yield time to my colleague, Mr. Bishop, for any comments, closing comments.
No, I thank the director for her attendance here, and I have a great deal of faith that the professionals there will make the right decision in all these areas as we visit Yellowstone Wilderness Area or any other national park that we actually have. Just reminding you, last element, that it's Golden Spike is your #1 priority, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is. And I knew the superintendent was there, and I have one of the Golden Spike pins. So, yes, sir.
It's the only one I got in my district, so
I know you do, I know.
Just cover yourself and you're fine. But I appreciate your being here, and I appreciate your testimony and your answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop, and let me commend you on your subtlety. Thank you, Madam Director. Appreciate your time and your testimony and your colleagues as well. Just 3 quick follow-up questions, not for an answer right now, but for information. It's our understanding, let me follow up on what my colleague, Mr. Pierce's question, that National Public Service has completed the facility condition assessments of all national park units, and look forward to the committee receiving those assessments so that we can have an opportunity to look at that. The other little piece of information having to do with public places and some parks relative to issues in my district having to do with the 9/11 issue, border security issue, and the cost attendant to that, and what is environmental cost plus the economic burden that's putting on our National Park Service, and I'd like a breakdown of that. That's been required by Homeland Security to do that. Are we being reimbursed as a Park Service for any of those security costs? So any of that kind of information would be important. And I will submit other questions in writing, but those 2 in particular. Thank you very much, and appreciate your time and your patience, and the meeting's adjourned.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.